That Friday night started like any other. The living room was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV. Emma sat curled up under a blanket, a bowl of popcorn in her lap, while her teenage son Jake flipped through Netflix. It was their weekly ritual: no phones, no distractions, just a movie night to unwind after a long week. Emma smiled faintly when Jake teased her about always choosing emotional films. She laughed, pretending everything was fine, but deep down her heart felt heavy. Something inside her had been uneasy for months, though she couldn't fully name it. Her husband Mark had been coming home late more often. He always had the same excuse: meetings, deadlines, new clients. Emma wanted to believe him, but lately his eyes didn't light up when he saw her, and his voice had lost its warmth. He wasn't cruel or distant in words, but in spirit, he was somewhere else. She noticed the subtle things: how he avoided sitting next to her, how his phone never left his side, and how his smile seemed rehearsed. Still, she told herself that marriages had ups and downs. She wanted to keep things peaceful for Jake. Jake finally picked a light comedy. He leaned back, the glow of the TV reflecting on his face. Emma tried to focus on the movie, but her thoughts kept drifting toward Mark. He was supposed to be home by now, but he'd texted earlier saying he had to finish something at the office. She sighed softly, feeling that familiar ache of loneliness that came even when she wasn't alone. Jake noticed her silence and looked at her. "You okay, Mom?" he asked casually. Emma forced a small smile. "Just tired, honey. It's been a long week." For a while, they watched in silence. The room was warm, the scent of popcorn filling the air, but Emma's mind wouldn't settle. She felt something shifting in her home, a distance she couldn't explain. Then, out of nowhere, Jake paused the movie. The sudden stillness caught her off guard. "Mom," he said quietly, his tone serious now, "can I ask you something?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Of course," she replied, trying to sound calm. He hesitated, his eyes nervous, like he was afraid to say what was on his mind. "Are you okay with Dad lately?" Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Jake looked down at his hands. "I don't know. It's just, you both seem different." And yesterday, he stopped, taking a deep breath. "I saw Dad downtown." Emma's chest tightened. "Okay," she said slowly. And Jake's voice dropped. He wasn't alone. The air in the room shifted instantly. Emma's pulse quickened, but she stayed still, her mind struggling to process what he said. "What do you mean, not alone?" she asked, though her voice trembled slightly. Jake looked uncomfortable. He was with a woman, at a cafe near Main Street. They looked close. Not like co-workers close. More like, he trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. Emma felt her stomach twist. She wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Mark was meeting a client. Maybe Jake saw it wrong. She tried to hold on to that thought, but her son's sincerity made it hard to ignore. Jake wasn't dramatic. He didn't make things up. "Did they see you?" she asked softly. Jake shook his head. "No. I was across the street with a friend. But, Mom, I just thought you should know." The movie sat frozen on the screen. Bright colors and laughter paused in time. Emma stared blankly at it, her thoughts spinning faster than she could control. A quiet, cold feeling crept through her chest. All the little signs she had ignored suddenly started connecting: the late nights, the distracted tone, the distance in his eyes. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was overthinking. But deep inside, something told her that this wasn't just about work. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake nodded, watching her carefully, unsure if he'd done the right thing. Emma reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You did nothing wrong, Jake. Okay." He nodded again, still uneasy, and pressed play on the movie, though neither of them really watched it. The laughter on the TV felt hollow now, echoing in a room heavy with silence. Emma's mind was far away: that cafe, with Mark, with whoever that woman was. When the movie ended, Jake went upstairs, mumbling a quiet goodnight. Emma stayed on the couch, staring at the black TV screen, her reflection faintly visible. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. For years, she had given everything her time, her patience, her love. And now there was a shadow over all of it. Still, she didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there replaying her son's words. He wasn't alone. Simple but powerful. It was a sentence that could unravel a marriage. She thought about calling Mark, asking him directly, but stopped herself. If she confronted him now without proof, he could easily deny it. She needed to be sure. She needed to see for herself what had changed between them. As the clock ticked past midnight, she stood and turned off the TV. The house felt colder somehow, quieter. She walked to her bedroom, noticing that half the bed was still untouched. She lay down but didn't close her eyes. Her mind was too busy asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Was she not enough? Had their love faded without her noticing? When did they stop being a team and start living as strangers under the same roof? She thought about Jake, how he must have felt seeing his father like that. It broke her heart. No child should ever have to carry that kind of secret. Hours later, when she finally drifted off, it was to the faint memory of laughter that no longer belonged to her present life. She dreamed of a time when Mark held her hand during movie nights, when his smile reached his eyes, when love didn't feel like something to question. But now, morning would come with a new reality, one she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't avoid anymore. The next day, she promised herself something. She wouldn't jump to conclusions. She would find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And when she did, she would decide what came next. Not as a wife trying to hold on, but as a woman learning to stand tall again. That night had started as just another movie night. But it ended as the moment everything changed. The night after Jake's words, Emma hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark sitting in that cafe with another woman. The image haunted her, even though she hadn't actually seen it. She kept telling herself there must be a reasonable explanation, but deep down, her instincts whispered otherwise. When morning came, she looked exhausted. Her coffee sat untouched as she stared out the kitchen window, lost in thought. She had spent years building this life with Mark, believing they were a team. Now everything felt fragile. It's like a thin sheet of glass ready to break with one wrong move. By afternoon, Emma made a decision. She couldn't keep wondering. She needed answers. Her phone buzzed a message from Mark saying he had a late meeting again. Her heart sank, but she typed back calmly. "Can we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us. I think we need to talk." Within a few minutes, he replied, "Sure. Been meaning to talk to." Those last words made her chest tighten. What did he mean by that? Was he going to confess? Or worse, was he planning to leave? That evening, Emma dressed simply. She didn't want to look desperate, but she didn't want to look careless either. When Mark arrived home, she greeted him politely, her tone steady but distant. He seemed surprised by her calmness. They sat across from each other at the dinner table, the air heavy with unspoken tension. The clinking of silverware sounded louder than usual. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Then Emma set down her fork and looked at him directly. "Mark," she said softly, "Jake saw you yesterday." He froze, his hand stopping midair. "What?" "He saw you downtown," she continued, her voice even but firm. "With a woman. At a cafe." Mark blinked a few times, caught off guard. For a moment, he didn't answer, just stared at his plate. Then he let out a deep sigh, rubbing his forehead. "Emma, it's not what you think." Her heart pounded. "Then tell me what it is," she said. He hesitated, struggling to find words. "Her name is Claire. She's a colleague. We've been working on a big project. We had lunch, that's all." "Lunch?" Emma asked quietly. "Jake said you looked close." Mark closed his eyes. "It's complicated." She felt the air leave her lungs. "So it's true," she whispered. "You crossed a line." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "It started as work. Then we got close. I didn't mean for it to happen." Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. "Did you love her?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. Mark shook his head quickly. No, it wasn't love. It was a mistake. I was stupid, and I hate myself for it. But those words, no matter how remorseful, couldn't erase the betrayal. For years, Emma had believed their love was unshakable. Now she realized how quietly things could fall apart. She stood up, unable to sit still. You had a choice, Mark. You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were unhappy. Instead, you let someone else fill that space. He got up to reaching for her hand, but she stepped back. Emma, please. I was lost. Work was stressful and we were barely talking. I felt like I was disappearing. Claire just listened. Emma looked at him with tears in her eyes. So while I was here holding our family together, you found comfort somewhere else. He didn't respond. The silence said enough. That night, she didn't cry in front of him. She didn't yell or break things. She simply walked away and went upstairs, leaving him standing in the kitchen with guilt written all over his face. When she reached her bedroom, she closed the door gently, sat on the bed, and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. The house that once felt warm and safe now felt foreign, filled with invisible cracks. She could hear Mark pacing downstairs, probably trying to figure out what to say next. But Emma didn't want words. She wanted truth, and now she had it. She sat in silence for a long time, replaying their years together. She remembered their first date, how nervous he'd been. The way he proposed under a rain-soaked umbrella, laughing because he dropped the ring. The nights they stayed up talking about their future. And now, here they were, two people who had loved deeply once but somehow lost their way. The next morning, Mark tried to talk before leaving for work. Emma, please, we can fix this, he said. She looked at him steadily. I don't know if I can trust you again. He nodded, defeated. I'll do whatever it takes, said nothing more. After he left, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, staring at her wedding ring. She didn't take it off, but she touched it thoughtfully. She didn't know what the future held. She just knew she needed time to think, to breathe, to heal. That day, Jake came home from school and noticed how quiet she was. Did you talk to Dad? He asked carefully. Emma nodded. Yes. Was it true? She hesitated, then said, yes, but it's not your fault. You did the right thing. Jake's eyes filled with guilt. I didn't want to hurt anyone. She reached out, holding his hand. You didn't. You just showed me what I needed to see. As the sun set that evening, Emma stood by the window, watching the golden light fade. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing: she couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Mark slept in the guest room, and the distance between them felt endless. Still, beneath the pain, there was a strange kind of calm. The truth was out. The pretending was over. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt in control of her own story. She didn't know whether forgiveness or separation lay ahead, but she knew she would make the choice on her own terms. As she drifted to sleep, she whispered to herself, I'll get through this. Outside, the world moved on. The city lights blinked, cars passed by, life continued. And somewhere deep inside, Emma realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the moment she stopped living in the shadows and started facing the truth. The days after the confession felt long and heavy. The air inside the house was thick with silence. Emma went about her routine, making breakfast, packing lunches, going to work, but everything felt distant, mechanical. Mark moved quietly, careful not to upset her. And Jake tried his best to act normal, though his eyes often flickered with worry. The house that once held laughter and warmth now carried an invisible wall between every room. At first, Emma thought time would dull the pain, but instead it deepened. Every time she looked at Mark, memories collided, both the beautiful and the broken. She remembered their wedding dance, their first home, and how excited he'd been when Jake was born. Now all of it felt like someone else's story. At night, she lay awake listening to the faint creak of the guest room floor where Mark slept. Sometimes she heard him moving restlessly, and she wondered if guilt kept him up too. One evening, while folding laundry in the quiet living room, Emma came across one of Mark's sweaters. the dark gray one he always wore when they used to take walks in the park. For a moment, she froze, holding it close. The faint scent of his cologne hit her like a wave, and suddenly, the tears she had held back for weeks finally fell. She sat down on the couch, burying her face in the fabric, letting herself cry. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was the loss of safety. The end of a version of life she had trusted completely. After that night, something changed in her. She realized she couldn't keep living in pain and silence. She needed to move forward, one way or another. The next day, she took a walk after work, trying to clear her thoughts. The evening air was crisp, the sky painted orange and pink. As she passed families walking dogs and couples holding hands, she felt both lonely and strangely free. Maybe healing didn't mean pretending everything was fine. Maybe it meant learning to live with what happened. And choosing peace anyway. When she got home, Jake was sitting on the porch steps. He looked up, concerned. "Mom, you've been so quiet. Are you mad at me for telling you?" Emma sat beside him, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." He stared at the ground. "I just feel like I ruined everything." Her heart ached at his words. "No," she said gently. "What happened was already there. You just helped me see it." He nodded slowly, then asked, "Do you still love Dad?" Emma took a long breath before answering. "Love doesn't just disappear, Jake. But sometimes it changes. It stops being about holding on and becomes about letting go or starting over." They sat there in silence for a while, watching the sky fade into night. Emma realized her son had grown up more than she thought. He wasn't a child anymore. He had seen what honesty costs, but also what it gives. Later that night, when Mark came home, Emma was waiting for him in the kitchen. He stopped at the doorway, looking unsure. She gestured for him to sit down. "Mark," she began calmly, "we can't live like this anymore. The silence, the distance, it's not helping anyone. We need to decide what we're doing." He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I know. I've been trying to give you space." "Don't need space," she said. "I need truth. I need to know if we're fixing this or ending it." Mark leaned forward, his voice cracking slightly. "Emma, I don't want to lose you. I made a terrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." Emma looked at him, her face calm but unreadable. "It's not about saying sorry, Mark. It's about showing me something different. Actions, not words." He nodded, understanding. "Then I'll prove it." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The next few weeks were awkward but slowly improving. Mark made an effort to be home on time. He started talking more about work, about Jake, about simple things that used to be normal. Emma didn't smile much at first, but she noticed. She also began going to therapy, something she had avoided before. Talking to someone helped her release what she couldn't say at home. Mark eventually agreed to join her in couples counseling. The sessions were painful at times, forcing them to face every hidden emotion they had buried. There were tears, anger, even moments when Emma thought it was pointless. But then there were days when it felt like progress small. Fragile progress. One afternoon, after a session, they went for coffee together. It wasn't planned, but it felt natural. They talked about Jake's school, the weather, even laughed once or twice. It wasn't romance, yet it was rebuilding familiarity at home. Jake noticed the difference. The tension was still there, but lighter somehow. One night, he found them sitting together on the couch, quietly watching the news. It wasn't much, but to him, it meant hope. Still, some nights were hard. Emma sometimes woke from dreams where everything was normal again, only to remember reality. She didn't trust Isley anymore, but she saw that Mark was trying, genuinely trying. He canceled late meetings, invited her to lunch, left notes again like he used to years ago. It didn't fix everything, but it showed her he cared. Months passed. And the weight of betrayal started to ease, replaced by cautious connection. Emma began smiling again, though her heart remained guarded. She wasn't doing it for Mark anymore, she was doing it for herself. For Jake, for the possibility of peace. One evening, she found Mark sitting in the backyard looking at the stars. He turned when she came out. "Remember when we used to do this?" he said quietly. Emma sat beside him. "Yes, you used to tell me those weren't stars, just city lights." He chuckled softly. "I was wrong about a lot of things." They sat in silence, and for once, it wasn't awkward. There was understanding, gentle, unspoken, fragile. That night, before going to bed, Emma stood at her bedroom door. For a moment, she thought about sleeping alone again. Then she turned the knob and walked down the hall to the guest room. Mark looked up as she entered, surprised. She didn't say anything, just looked at him for a moment, then whispered good night. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close, a small step toward it. In the following days, they began rebuilding small routines, breakfasts together, weekend walks, little jokes about old times. Jake's laughter returned, filling the spaces that had felt empty for so long. Emma knew they would never go back to how things were. But maybe, just maybe, they could create something new, something honest. She didn't forget what happened, but she stopped letting it control every thought. Healing wasn't quick or perfect, but it was happening slowly, quietly. One choice at a time. For the first time in months, Emma woke up one morning and felt something like peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because she finally believed she could be okay no matter what the future brought. Months had passed since the night Emma had confronted Mark. The house felt different, now not perfect, but alive in a way it hadn't been for a long time. The silence that had hung over every room was gone, replaced with small conversations, soft laughter, and quiet moments that reminded Emma of what they had once shared. Healing had been slow and uneven. Some days, the past felt heavy, pressing down on her chest. Other days, hope flickered in the corners, tiny but persistent. She learned that recovery wasn't a straight line, it was a series of steps, forward and backward, each one teaching her something new. Emma noticed the change first in herself. She no longer woke in the middle of the night with her heart racing at the thought of Mark and Claire. She no longer felt a constant knot of anger in her stomach. Instead, she felt cautious optimism. She could smile without forcing it, laugh without guilt, and let her mind wander without it immediately returning to betrayal. Mark, too, had changed. He was present not just physically, but emotionally. He listened when she spoke, made an effort to connect, and sometimes simply held her hand in silence. Actions, not words, had started to rebuild trust. Jake noticed it too. The tension that had filled their home was replaced with normalcy, small as it was. Dinner conversations became livelier, and the occasional joke made all three of them laugh until their sides ached. One Friday night, they sat together on the couch just as they had before the betrayal came to light. Popcorn in hand, blankets draped around them, they scrolled through Netflix. The living room light glowed softly, creating a warm bubble of comfort. Halfway through the movie, Jake nudged Emma and whispered, "Remember last time we watched a movie like this?" Emma smiled softly, recalling the night he had told her about seeing Mark with another woman. That memory still stung, but it no longer consumed her. She answered gently, "How could I forget?" Mark reached over and took her hand, lightly at first. Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the connection again, the familiar warmth and the unspoken promise that they were working to rebuild what had been broken. The gesture wasn't dramatic, but it spoke volumes. Trust wasn't restored in a single act, but in these quiet, consistent moments. The family continued to grow closer over the following weeks. They found a rhythm that had been missing for months. Mark made a habit of sharing small parts of his day with Emma, showing interest in her work and listening without distraction. They laughed about things that had seemed trivial before, but which now carried the joy of togetherness. Jake, seeing both his parents actively trying to reconnect, began to relax. He smiled more freely and felt secure again, realizing that families could endure even the hardest challenges when honesty and effort were present. Emma herself embraced life with renewed strength. She started spending more time on her own hobbies, reconnecting with friends, and finding moments of solitude that reminded her she could be happy independently. But happiness didn't mean closing the door on Marquette, meant acknowledging the pain of the past, while choosing to nurture the present. She found that love could take new forms, gentler and deeper, shaped by both endurance and forgiveness. Mark, too, learned to demonstrate his commitment daily. He canceled late-night meetings without complaint, planned small surprises for Emma, and consistently showed accountability. He didn't expect immediate forgiveness or trust, and he respected Emma's need for space when it felt necessary. Their conversations, once stiff and awkward, became honest exchanges where both could express fear, doubt, and hope. With time, those talks no longer ended in tension but in understanding. One evening, Emma found herself standing in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky with soft pinks and oranges. Mark joined her silently, bringing 2 cups of tea. They stood side by side, sharing the warmth without speaking. The silence felt comforting, not oppressive. "It's beautiful," Emma murmured, more to herself than to him. Mark nodded, his hand brushing against hers. "It is, and we're still here, together." She turned to him, and for a moment, words weren't necessary. They had survived the worst of it, and though the scars remained, there were no longer obstacles but reminders of their resilience. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant moving forward with awareness, care, and commitment. Soon, small milestones marked their progress. Family dinners became an unspoken tradition again, not out of obligation but out of genuine connection. Movie nights were full of laughter, casual teasing, and shared stories. Emma noticed herself laughing at Mark's jokes without restraint, feeling genuine warmth. It wasn't that the past had vanished, it was that they had learned to live with it, not let it dominate their lives. One Friday night, Emma, Mark, and Jake sat on the couch as the familiar Netflix glow filled the room. Jake leaned against Emma and whispered, "I'm glad we're back like this." Emma smiled, holding him close. "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." Mark reached for her hand, this time with a subtle but certain pressure. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a powerful message. Trust could be rebuilt, and love could be renewed, even after betrayal. Later that night, when Jake had gone to bed, Emma and Mark sat quietly together in the living room. No words were necessary. The closeness between them spoke volumes. The hard conversations, the tears, and the counseling sessions had led them to this moment. It wasn't perfect, and they knew the road ahead would still have challenges. But the foundation was strong, built on honesty, effort, and commitment. Emma realized that life didn't have to be about restoring the past exactly as it was. Healing meant creating something new, something shaped by awareness and a choice to care deeply. Even when the heart had been broken, she looked at Mark and saw someone who had faltered but was willing to grow, willing to repair what had been damaged. And in that willingness, she found hope. The next morning, the family awoke to a quiet sun filtering through the curtains. Breakfast was lighthearted, filled with chatter and smiles. Jake laughed at something Mark said, and Emma felt her chest lift with relief. Their lives were not erased by the betrayal. They were continuing, shaped now by